My name is Rachel, and I was 29 the afternoon I unzipped my garment bag 1 hour before my wedding and found a stranger's dress hanging where my dead mother's should have been. A champagne-colored sheath, stiff, cheap, 3 sizes too big, with the store tag still dangling from the sleeve. My mother's gown, the one she wore in 1989. The one she made me promise I'd wear. The one I spent 8 months restoring after she was gone was not in that bag. It was just gone. And as I stood there in my robe and my half-finished hair, shaking, the wedding planner stepped into the room, closed the door behind her, looked me dead in the eye, and said 6 words I will never forget. Don't panic. I have your dress. Welcome to Composed Drama Stories, where the women everyone underestimated finally tell their side. If quiet strength and slow justice are your kind of evening, stay with me. Let me take you back to that bridal suite, because I need you to understand exactly what I was looking at. The Ashford Barn was the kind of venue you save up 2 years for. A restored estate, barn out in the country, white oak beams, string lights, a meadow that turned gold in October. The bridal suite was upstairs. A long mirror, a velvet couch, a rack where my dress was supposed to be waiting for me. I dropped that dress off myself the night before, in its garment bag, and hung it on that rack with my own hands. And now I was standing there an hour before the ceremony, makeup half done, my bridesmaids still downstairs, and the bag held a dress I had never seen before in my life. I remember the price tag most of all. A little white tag, still on, the kind you'd see on a clearance rack. $180. My mother's dress was not for sale at any price. My mother's dress did not have a tag. My mother's dress had a tiny blue ribbon sewn into the hem where no one could see it. Because that was her something blue, and she'd asked the seamstress to put it there before she died. I unzipped that bag, expecting to cry happy tears at the sight of her. Instead, I sank down onto the floor of that suite in my robe, and I couldn't breathe, and I couldn't think. And the only thought that would form was, she's gone. She's gone all over again. But to understand why a dress could break me, why I ended up on the floor of that beautiful room an hour before the happiest day of my life, you need to know whose dress it was. And you need to know the woman who took it. My mother's name was Eleanor. She was a second-grade teacher for 31 years. She had a laugh that filled a room and a way of making you feel like you were the only person she'd ever wanted to talk to. She got sick when I was 26. Ovarian cancer. By the time they found it, it had already spread, and we had 11 months. 11 months from the diagnosis to the morning I held her hand in a hospice bed and watched her go. I want to tell you about one of those 11 months, because it matters. I wasn't even engaged yet. Eric and I had been together 2 years, and we both knew it was coming, but it hadn't happened. And one afternoon, my mother bawled from the chemo, wrapped in 3 blankets because she was always cold by then, asked me to pull a box down from the top of her closet. Inside was her wedding dress from 1989. Ivory, with these beautiful covered buttons up the back and lace at the sleeves that had gone soft and a little yellow with age. She said, "I want you to wear this. When it's time. I know it's old-fashioned. I know the lace is a mess. But I won't get to be there, baby. And if you're wearing this, then part of me is." I told her to stop talking like that. I told her she would be there. She just smiled at me the way mothers do when they know something you're not ready to know yet. "Take it to Mrs. Petrova," she said. "She'll know what to do. And tell her about the blue." Mrs. Petrova was the seamstress my mother had used for 30 years. A tiny, fierce Ukrainian woman with a shop the size of a closet and hands that could do anything with a needle. We went together, the two of us, my mother in a wheelchair by then. And my mother told Mrs. Petrova she wanted a little blue ribbon hidden in the hem. Something blue, for me, for the day she couldn't come. Mrs. Petrova didn't say anything. She just nodded, and she took my mother's hand in both of hers, and the two old friends sat there for a minute, not saying anything at all. My mother died 3 weeks later, and I couldn't touch that dress for over a year. It hung in my closet in its bag, and I'd open the door sometimes and just look at it and close the door again. It was Eric who finally said, gently, one night, maybe finishing it would help. Maybe she'd want you to. So I went back to Mrs. Petrova, and for 8 months, off and on, that little shop became the place I went to feel close to my mother. Mrs. Petrova restored the lace, replaced the lining, took it in to fit me, and she sewed the blue ribbon into the hem, exactly where my mother had asked. By the time it was finished, that dress wasn't fabric anymore. It was my mother. It was the only way she was going to walk me down that aisle. So now you understand the dress. Let me tell you about Patricia. Patricia is Eric's mother. My mother-in-law. From the very first dinner, I knew Patricia had not chosen me. She had a particular smile she used on me, lips only, eyes flat, and she used it a lot. Eric had dated a woman named Brooke for most of college. Brooke's family had money. Brooke's mother and Patricia were in the same garden club, and Patricia never quite got over the fact that Eric had picked a NICU nurse named Rachel instead of the daughter she'd already half adopted in her head. She wasn't cruel out loud. That wasn't her style. Patricia did everything with a smile and a soft voice and a knife you didn't feel go in until later. Oh, a nurse. That's such important work. Not glamorous, but important. Eric's father, and I just want him to be comfortable. You understand. She redecorated our engagement around herself. She invited herself to my dress fittings. She had opinions about the venue, the flowers, the guest list, the napkins, and she had a very particular opinion about the dress. I'd made the mistake of bringing her to Mrs. Petrova's shop once, during a fitting. I thought naively that sharing my mother's dress with her might soften her, might make her see what it meant. Patricia walked into that tiny shop, looked at my mother's gown on the form, and said, "Oh, it's very vintage, isn't it? A bit of a sad little museum piece, if I'm honest. You know, I'd be more than happy to buy you something real. Something current." My treat, Mrs. Petrova, who was pinning my hem at the time, went very still. I felt her hand pause against my ankle. I said it was my mother's. "I'm wearing my mother's dress." And Patricia smiled that lips only smile and said, "Of course you are, dear. I just hate for people to talk." I let it go. You let so much go. When you're marrying into a family, you tell yourself it's not worth the fight, that you're gaining a husband and you can survive his mother. I didn't understand yet that Patricia wasn't making conversation that day. She was telling me her plan. I just wasn't listening. Now I want to take you to the night before the wedding, because 2 things happened that I didn't understand until much, much later. The rehearsal dinner was at the barn. And there was a woman there I'd only met a handful of times, our wedding planner. Vivienne. Vivienne had been doing weddings for 22 years. She was maybe 55, silver bob, reading glasses on a chain, and she carried a binder so thick it had its own handle. Nothing rattled her. I'd watched her handle a broken caterer, a missing groomsman, and a thunderstorm warning, all in one planning meeting, without raising her voice once. During the venue walkthrough weeks earlier, she'd pointed up at a small camera in the corner of the lobby and said, Almost offhand, Ashford has security on the grounds lobby, parking, the storage shed out back. It's an insurance thing. Honestly, it's saved more than one wedding. People behave differently when they remember they're on camera. I hadn't thought a thing of it at the time. File that away. It matters more than I knew. At the rehearsal dinner, I overheard Patricia talking to her sister Maureen near the bar. I only caught a piece of it. Patricia, in that soft voice, saying something about that depressing old thing, and trust me, it's handled. I assumed she was talking about a centerpiece. The flowers had been a whole drama. I let it go, like I let everything go. But Vivienne heard it too. And Vivienne, it turned out, had been doing this long enough to know exactly what a certain kind of mother-in-law sounds like when she's planning something. She didn't say anything to me. But she filed it away, the way you do after 22 years. The morning of the wedding, I left the barn early to get my hair and makeup done at a salon in town with my bridesmaids. We were gone for about 4 hours. The dress stayed behind, on the rack, in the suite. And that's the window. That's when it happened. While I was sitting in a salon chair, laughing with my best friends, somebody walked into that suite and took my mother off the rack. While I was at the salon, my phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Hope you're not too nervous, sweetheart. Big day. Try to keep it together for Eric's sake. I remember laughing it off to my bridesmaids. Classic Patricia, I said. One last little dig before the big day. I had no idea she was texting me from a place where she already knew my mother's dress was sitting in a trash bag behind a stack of folding chairs. She was checking on me, the way an arsonist circles back to watch the smoke. That's the part that still turns my stomach, if I let it. She didn't do it in a rage. There was no fight that morning, no screaming match, no moment of passion she could later blame the wedding stress for. She did it cold. She did it early. She ordered the replacement weeks ahead. She carried my mother out to a shed at 10:52 in the morning. And then she sat down and sent me a text about staying calm. Here is what I didn't know was happening while I was gone, and what I only pieced together later. Mid-morning, Vivienne was doing her rounds. She has a habit, she told me this later, of photographing every room of every wedding before the guests arrive. Every table, every setup. For my records, she said. And because sometimes, later, a photo is the only thing that tells the truth. She went up to the bridal suite to photograph it. And she stopped. Because the dress in the garment bag was wrong. Vivienne had seen my mother's gown. She'd seen it at a fitting consultation. She'd admired the lace. I'd told her the whole story, including the blue ribbon. She knew that dress. And what was hanging in that bag now was a stiff champagne sheath with a clearance tag. She told me her stomach dropped. And then she remembered Patricia at the bar. That depressing old thing. It's handled. Vivienne did not panic. Vivienne never panics. She went straight downstairs to the venue manager, a young man named Cole, and she asked to see the morning's camera feed. As the lead planner with the venue's authorization, she had every right to. Cole pulled it up. And there she was. Patricia on the lobby camera at 10:52 that morning, walking through with a bulky black garment bag over her arm, not toward the suite, away from it, toward the back door. They followed her on the next camera, the one on the storage shed out back. At 10:54, Patricia opened the shed, looked over her shoulder once, and stuffed the black bag behind a stack of folding chairs and a roll of old carpet. Then she walked back inside, smoothing her dress, perfectly calm. Vivienne and Cole went straight to that shed, and behind the folding chairs, jammed into a black trash bag like garbage, was my mother's wedding gown. Vivienne told me her hands were actually shaking when she pulled it out, and Vivienne's hands never shake. There was a smudge of dirt on the hem, and one of the covered buttons had popped loose. But it was intact. It was whole. It was my mother. She knew that day of, an emergency seamstress was on call, the way good planners arrange. She had the button fixed, and the hem steamed within 40 minutes. And then she hung my mother's dress in her own locked office downstairs, and she told Cole to say nothing to anyone. She didn't tell me yet either, because I wasn't there. I was still at the salon, blissfully unaware, and she didn't confront Patricia. Because, and this is the part I understand now, Vivienne knew that the second she confronted Patricia, Patricia would start lying. And a liar who's been warned gets careful. A liar who thinks she's won gets sloppy. So Vivienne let her think she'd won. I came back to the barn around 2:30. Everyone was buzzing. My bridesmaids went down to take photos in the meadow. And I went up to the suite, alone, to have my private moment with my mother's dress before I put it on. I unzipped the bag. And you already know what I found. Let me sit in that moment with you, because I think anyone who has ever lost a parent will understand it. It wasn't about a dress being missing. If it had been any other dress, I'd have been furious, sure, but this was different. For one full minute, sitting on that floor, I genuinely believed she was gone. That the last piece of her I had left in the world had vanished an hour before I needed her most. I felt 19 kinds of grief stack up on top of each other. And underneath the grief, fast, came the panic, because the practical math was brutal. 1 hour. I had 1 hour. 200 guests were already arriving in the meadow. My mother's dress was nowhere, and I was supposed to walk down an aisle in 60 minutes. What was I going to do? Walk down the aisle in a robe? Wear a clearance sheath 3 sizes too big? Cancel my own wedding an hour out? And then, right behind the panic, came the doubt, the thing Patricia counted on. Maybe it was a mix-up. Maybe the cleaner sent the wrong bag. Maybe I was overreacting. And if I made a scene, I'd be the crazy bride who ruined her own wedding over a dress. Maybe everyone would say I was unstable, emotional, dramatic. I actually sat there, on the floor, and wondered if the smart thing, the gracious thing, was to just put on the champagne dress and say nothing and not make a fuss. That is what people like Patricia do to you. They don't just take the thing. They make you doubt that taking it even happened. They make you wonder if you're the problem for noticing. I want to tell you about the memory that hit me on that floor, because it's the thing that nearly finished me. When I was small 5, maybe 6, I'd had a nightmare and crawled into my parents' bed, and my mother had wrapped me up and said, "I've got you. Nothing gets past me. Go to sleep." And for 20-some years, that was just true. Nothing got past her. She was the wall between me and the dark. And sitting on that floor in my robe, the thought that gutted me wasn't even about the dress. It was, the wall is gone. Anyone can take anything now. And there's no one standing in front of me anymore. I have never felt more alone than I did in that minute. 200 people in a meadow. A man who loved me at the end of an aisle. And I felt like the loneliest person in the world. Because the one person who was supposed to protect me on that day had been dead for 3 years, and now even her dress was gone. And that's exactly when the door opened. And Vivienne walked in, and closed it behind her, and looked at me on the floor. "Don't panic," she said. "I have your dress." I looked up at her. I'm sure I looked insane. "What?" "Your mother's dress," she said, kneeling down so she was at my level. "It's safe. It's downstairs in my office, steamed and ready. Nobody is wearing that. She nodded at the champagne sheath like it was something the cat dragged in, down any aisle today. I started crying, the real kind, the ugly kind, and Vivienne, this composed woman I barely knew, took my hands and said, "Listen to me. I need you to hear two things. One, you are going to walk down that aisle in your mother's gown, exactly like you planned. Nothing has been taken from you. Do you understand?" I nodded. "Two," she said, and her voice went very even. "I know exactly what happened to it. And I know exactly who did it. But right now, today, that is not your job. Today, your only job is to marry that man. Let me carry the rest. Can you let me carry it?" I want you to understand what it meant, in that moment, to have a near stranger look at me and say, "Let me carry it." I'd spent 2 years being quietly diminished by Patricia and swallowing it to keep the peace. I'd spent 3 years missing my mother, and here was this woman with a silver bob and a binder telling me to stand up, because she had me. So I stood up. She brought me my mother's dress. And I want to tell you, when I put it on, when that soft old lace came up over my shoulders, I felt her. I genuinely felt my mother in that room. The smudge was gone. The button was fixed, and down in the hem, where no one could see, was a tiny blue ribbon. But I didn't know yet what it had cost to get it back to me. And I didn't know that the woman who tried to throw my mother in a trash bag was about to sit in the front row and watch me walk toward her, wearing the very dress she thought she'd thrown away. The ceremony was at 4. I came down the staircase of the barn and onto the arm of my uncle, who'd flown in to give me away because my dad passed when I was a kid. And we started down the aisle. And I watched Patricia's face. She was in the front row, in lavender, dabbing her eyes for the crowd, playing the part of the emotional mother of the groom. And then she saw the dress. I will remember the look on her face for the rest of my life. The dab stopped. Her hand froze halfway to her cheek. The color drained right out from under her makeup. Her eyes went wide, and then darted fast toward the back of the barn, toward the doors, like she was doing math, like she was thinking, but I put it in the shed. I saw it go in the shed. She knew. In that second, she knew the dress had come back from the dead, and she had no idea how. I held her gaze for one step. Just one. I didn't smile. I didn't glare. I just looked at her, calm in my mother's dress, and then I looked away and kept walking toward Eric. And Eric, my Eric, was crying at the end of the aisle because he knew exactly what that dress was, and he had no idea yet that his mother had tried to make it disappear. I reached Eric, and he took my hands, and the first thing he whispered wasn't, "You look beautiful." It was, "She's here. I can feel her." And I nodded, because I could feel her too, in the soft weight of that old lace across my shoulders. We got married under the white oak beams with the meadow gold behind us. It was beautiful. Vivienne had timed it down to the minute. For about 3 hours, it was the happiest day of my life, and I let it be that. I decided, and Vivienne agreed, that I would not blow up my own wedding. Patricia did not get to turn my reception into a scene about her. We'd deal with it after. The truth wasn't going anywhere. It was sitting safe in a locked office and on a hard drive. But here's the thing about people like Patricia. The moment they realize they've been caught, they don't get quiet. They get loud first. The trouble started 3 days after the honeymoon, when Eric and I got back. Because in those days, while we were away, Patricia had not been idle. Patricia had been on the phone. She had called Eric's father. She had called the aunts. She had called the cousins. And she had gotten her version of the story out first, The way she always did, the way she'd done at the rehearsal dinner, the way she did everything. And her version was a masterpiece. In Patricia's version, there had been a terrible mix-up with the garment bags. She'd tried to help by moving things around, and it had all gotten so confused. And then this is the part that took my breath away, that poor Rachel had completely overreacted, had been hysterical, had accused her own mother-in-law of something insane on her wedding day, and that planner woman has clearly had it out for me from the start. She told the family I'd staged the whole thing, that I'd hidden my own dress to make her look bad, that I was trying to drive a wedge between Eric and his mother. Defamation, slander, in plain words, spreading a damaging lie about someone as if it were a fact. That's what she did to the whole family while we were away. And it worked. Partly, Eric's father, Gerald, a quiet, fair man, retired engineer. The kind who hates conflict and wants to believe the best of his wife of 34 years, Gerald didn't know what to think. 2 of the aunts went full Team Patricia. The family group chat, which I'd been added to as the happy new bride, turned into a cold, awful place where people I'd just danced with at my wedding now looked at me sideways. Eric believed me. Completely. He'd seen my face, he'd seen the dress, he knew his mother. But Eric believing me wasn't enough, because Patricia had turned it into his word and my word against hers. And she was his mother, and a mother's tears are very loud. I sat in our apartment 3 days after the most beautiful day of my life, and I felt that old, familiar helplessness creeping back in. I could feel it happening. The lie was setting like concrete. Soon it would just be the truth that crazy Rachel made a scene at the wedding, poor Patricia. What a way to start a marriage. And I could have let it go. I want to be honest about that. There was a strong, tired part of me that just wanted to absorb it, the way I'd absorbed everything for 2 years. Keep the peace. Be the bigger person. Let Patricia have her story if it kept the family from exploding. But then I thought about the shed. I thought about my mother's gown, stuffed in a trash bag, jammed behind a roll of old carpet like garbage, an hour before I needed her, and something in me went very quiet and very clear. I was done letting it go. I called Vivienne. I want the truth on the record, I told her. Not to be cruel, I can't let her tell the family I'm a liar. I can't let that be the story of my marriage. And Vivienne said the thing that became my whole strategy. Then, we don't argue with her, Rachel. People like Patricia win arguments. They're very good at arguments. So we don't have one. We just gather what's true, quietly, and we lay it down on the table all at once, and we let it speak for itself. A liar can out-talk a person. A liar can't out-talk a wall of evidence. A wall of evidence. So that's what we built. Piece by piece. And I want to walk you through it, because each piece was its own small battle. The first piece was the footage. Vivienne had seen it that morning on Cole's screen, but seeing it and having it are 2 different things. The footage belonged to the venue, not to us. So I did it properly. I contacted the Ashford barn in writing. I explained the situation. I asked formally for a copy of the security footage from the morning of my wedding between 10 and 11 a.m., lobby and storage shed. At first, the barn's owner was nervous. Cameras, privacy, liability they didn't want to get in the middle of a family fight. But here's where Vivienne's 22 years paid off. The barn was one of her regular venues. She'd sent them dozens of weddings. She made one phone call, vouched for me, and explained that the footage showed a guest tampering with a bride's property on their grounds, which was frankly their liability too. But it didn't come easily, and I want to be honest about the 2 weeks in between. Because they were hard. The barn's owner, a woman named Sandra, called me back after my written request, and she was kind, but cautious. She said she needed to think about the liability, that she'd never had to hand footage over before, that maybe I should talk to a lawyer first. I could hear it in her voice. She didn't want to be in the middle of a family war. I hung up and felt that door start to swing shut, and the old helpless feeling came rushing back. Without that footage, it really would just be my word against Patricia's. And while I was waiting, Patricia made her move on Eric directly. She called him one evening, crying, and I sat on the couch and listened to my husband's face change as he held the phone. She told him I was obsessed, that I was tearing the family apart over a dress, that a good son would make his wife let this go. She was working him the way she'd worked everyone for 34 years, through love, through guilt, through tears. And I watched Eric struggle. I won't pretend he didn't. That's his mother. When he hung up, he sat there quiet for a long time, and I felt my stomach drop. Because I thought, maybe this is where I lose. Maybe the easiest thing really is to let it go. But Eric turned to me and said, "She didn't ask me once if it was true. Not once. She just told me to make you stop." My mother heard her son's wife was hurt, and her only question was how to shut it down. He shook his head. "No, we finish this." That was the moment I knew my marriage was going to be okay, no matter what happened with the rest of it. And the footage did come through because of Vivienne. She called Sandra herself, planner to venue owner, 22 years of scent business behind her, and explained gently that the footage protected the barn just as much as it protected me. Because what it showed was a guest tampering with a guest's property on Ashford's grounds. Sandra agreed the next morning. 2 weeks later, I had a flash drive, and on it was everything Vivienne had described. Patricia, 1052, black bag over her arm, walking away from the suite. Patricia, 1054, at the shed, glancing over her shoulder, stuffing my mother into the dark, behind the folding chairs. Time-stamped, clear, her face, plain as day. There is no mix-up that looks like that. A mix-up doesn't check over its shoulder. The second piece was the dress itself. The champagne sheath. Now here's something I didn't know to think of, but Vivienne did. She had kept it. After the wedding, she'd taken that champagne sheath, the one left in my bag, and she'd put it in a clean garment bag in her office, and she hadn't let it out of her sight. Chain of custody, she called it. In plain words, being able to prove that an object was never tampered with, that it went straight from the scene into safe hands and stayed there. So no one could later claim we'd faked anything. And tucked inside that champagne dress, still in the interior pocket of its own bag, was a packing slip. An online order packing slip. With an order date. And a billing name. The dress had been ordered 3 weeks before the wedding. Billed to Patricia Vance. 3 weeks. Premeditation. In plain words, she didn't grab some random dress in a panic that morning. She had sat at her computer 3 weeks earlier, picked out a replacement, paid for it, and waited for it to arrive. All so that on the morning of my wedding, she could throw my mother in a shed and leave that thing in her place. That packing slip changed everything. Because a mix-up is an accident. A dress ordered 3 weeks in advance is a plan. The third piece was Mrs. Petrova. I went to see her. I brought her tea the way she liked it, strong with a sugar cube. I told her the whole story. The shed. The trash bag. The champagne dress. The lies Patricia was telling the family. That tiny, fierce woman put down her tea and said something in Ukrainian under her breath that I'm fairly sure was not polite. And then she told me she remembered the day Patricia came to the shop. Vividly, she remembered a sad little museum piece. She remembered I'd be happy to buy you something real. She'd never forgotten it, because she said, "You do not insult a dying woman's last gift to her daughter in Maria Petrova's shop," and walk out forgotten. Mrs. Petrova agreed, without my even fully asking, to write down everything she remembered and sign it. A statement about the dress, about its meaning, about the blue ribbon she'd sewn for a woman who was no longer alive to ask for it, and about exactly what Patricia had said. A witness. A real one. Who could speak to the one thing footage can't: Patricia's intent, her contempt, her motive. And then there was the fourth piece. The one I never went looking for. The one that came to me. Maureen, Patricia's own sister. About 3 weeks after the wedding, Maureen called me. Not Patricia Maureen. And she was crying. It turned out Maureen had been at that rehearsal dinner bar. Maureen was the one Patricia had said it's handled to. And Maureen, at the time, had assumed, like I had, that her sister was talking about flowers or seating or some small thing. But after the wedding, after Patricia started spinning her story, after Maureen heard about a dress found in a shed, she'd gone back and looked at her own phone. Because 3 weeks before the wedding, Patricia had texted her, and Patricia, who was always so careful out loud, had not been careful in writing. Maureen read it to me over the phone, and then she sent me the screenshot. The text said, "Don't worry about Rachel's depressing little funeral gown. It will not be making an appearance at my son's wedding. I've handled it. She'll be in something decent, or she'll be in a bathrobe. She'll be in something decent, or she'll be in a bathrobe." 3 weeks before my wedding. In her own words, in writing. Maureen said, "I can't be part of this anymore, Rachel. I love my sister, but what she did to your mother's dress, I can't. I'll give you the screenshot. I'll say it was real. I'm so sorry." I thanked her, and after I hung up, I sat down on my kitchen floor, the same way I'd sat on the floor of that bridal suite, and I cried again. But it was a different kind of crying this time. The kind that comes when someone finally tells you out loud that you weren't crazy. There was one night, somewhere in the middle of all that gathering, when I sat with the folder open and wondered if I'd become someone I didn't like, building a case against my own mother-in-law, collecting receipts and statements like a detective. Was I being obsessive? Petty? Was this what grief had turned me into? I called Vivienne, embarrassed, and asked her straight out, "Am I taking this too far?" And she said, "Rachel, you didn't start this. You're not the one who planned something cruel 3 weeks in advance. You're just the one refusing to be called a liar about it. There's nothing petty about wanting the truth on the record. Petty is hiding a dead woman's dress in a shed." That settled it for me. I stopped second-guessing and finished the work. So now I had it all. Laid out on my own kitchen table, where Eric and I sat and looked at it together. The footage. Patricia carrying my mother to a shed and hiding her behind the chairs. The packing slip. A replacement dress, bought and paid for 3 weeks ahead. Mrs. Petrova's signed statement. The contempt, the motive, the meaning of the dress. And Patricia's own text, in her own words, promising to make my mother's gown disappear. A mix-up doesn't look like that. A mix-up doesn't have a receipt dated 3 weeks early and a confession in writing. Eric looked at all of it for a long time. And then my husband, this gentle man who loved his mother, put his head in his hands And when he looked up, his eyes were wet, and his jaw was set, and he said, "My dad needs to see this. All of it." And then we're done pretending. Gerald was the key. We both knew it, because Patricia ran the family on Gerald's silence. As long as Gerald gave her the benefit of the doubt, the aunts followed, and the lie lived. Gerald was a fair man. He'd just never been shown anything but his wife's tears. So Eric called his father and asked for a family dinner. Everyone, to clear the air, once and for all. Patricia, I'm told, was thrilled. She thought it was the dinner where the family would finally pressure poor crazy Rachel to apologize and move on. She had no idea what was coming. Now I want to slow all the way down, because this is the part I waited for, and I'm not going to rush it. The dinner was at Gerald and Patricia's house. 2 weeks later, a Sunday. The whole family came. The 2 Team Patricia aunts, a couple of cousins, Maureen, who Patricia had no idea had turned, Eric and me, and Vivienne, who I'd asked to come, and who said yes without a moment's hesitation, binder and all. Patricia opened the door and saw Vivienne standing on her porch, and her smile flickered. Just for a second. "Oh," she said. "I didn't realize we were having guests. Vivienne was at the wedding," I said quietly. "She should be here. We ate first." It was excruciating. Patricia held court, light and bright, dropping little comments, setting the stage. Well, weddings are so stressful, aren't they? People aren't themselves. I think we can all forgive a few outbursts, a glance at me. The aunts nodded. I let her. I let her talk all the way through dinner. Vivienne had taught me that. Let them get comfortable. Let them think they've won. And then, when the plates were cleared, Gerald cleared his throat and said, in his quiet way, "All right," Eric said, "there were some things that needed saying. Let's say them and move past it. Rachel, I think everyone would appreciate it if we could just put the wedding behind us." He meant it kindly. He meant for me to apologize. The whole table turned to look at me, waiting for the crazy bride to make nice. I took a breath. "I agree, Gerald," I said. "I'd love to put it behind us. I just think before we do, everyone should actually know what happened. Not my version, not Patricia's version, just what happened. So no one has to wonder anymore." Patricia's smile tightened. "Rachel, we've all heard quite enough about the dress you haven't, though," I said. Calm, even. "You've heard a story about a mix-up. You haven't seen what actually happened that morning." And I nodded to Vivienne. And Vivienne opened her laptop on the dining room table and turned it around to face Gerald. "Miss Vance," Vivienne said, in that even 22 years voice. "The Ashford barn has security cameras on its grounds. This is their footage from the morning of the wedding. I think you should see it." And she pressed play. The lobby camera. 10:52 a.m. Patricia, walking through with a black garment bag. Patricia shot up out of her chair. "This is ridiculous. That proves nothing." I was helping sit down, Pat, Gerald said. I have never heard him use that tone. The whole table went silent. Patricia sat. The shed camera. 10:54. Patricia, glancing over her shoulder. Patricia, stuffing the black bag behind the folding chairs and the roll of carpet. Patricia, walking away, smoothing her dress. The room was so quiet. I could hear the clock in the hall. Then I set the packing slip on the table and slid it down to Gerald. "This was in the dress she left in my bag," I said. "It's an order slip. The dress was bought online. 3 weeks before the wedding. Billed to Patricia. Premeditation. I didn't even have to say the word. Gerald, an engineer, a man who'd spent 40 years reading specs and dates, looked at that date and I watched it land. 3 weeks, he said quietly. Not to me, to himself. Then, I set down Mrs. Petrova's statement. The seamstress who restored my mother's gown remembers Patricia coming to the shop and calling it, and I'm quoting, a sad little museum piece. She signed this. And then, last, I slid my phone across the table, the screenshot open. And this is a text Patricia sent 3 weeks before the wedding. I didn't go looking for it. It was given to me. Gerald picked up the phone and he read it out loud, in the dead silent room, in a flat, careful voice. Don't worry about Rachel's depressing little funeral gown. It will not be making an appearance at my son's wedding. I've handled it. She'll be in something decent or she'll be in a bathrobe. He set the phone down very gently. And then Gerald turned and looked at his wife of 34 years and asked one question. Who did you send this to, Patricia? And from the other end of the table, Maureen said, in a small, broken voice, Me, she sent it to me. Jerry, I'm so sorry. I should have said something weeks ago. Patricia's whole face came apart. The performance, the soft voice, the dabbing, the lips only smile, the 34 years of running the family on her version of events, all of it just collapsed, right there at her own dining room table, with the gravy still on the plates. She tried, one last time. She had to. Rachel hid that dress herself. She's twisting all of this. That planner has always stopped. Gerald didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Patricia, stop. I'm looking at it. We're all looking at it. There's a timestamp. There's a receipt with your name. There's a text in your own words. Stop. And then he said the thing that ended it. You took that girl's dead mother's wedding dress and you hid it in a shed. And then you told this whole family that she was the liar. He stood up from the table, this quiet, conflict-hating man. And he looked at me, and his eyes were wet, and he said, Rachel, I am so sorry. I believed her. I am ashamed that I believed her. Vivienne quietly closed her laptop. She didn't gloat. She didn't say a word. She just slid the flash drive back into her binder and gave me the smallest nod. The kind that says, that's done, you can put it down now. The two Team Patricia ants couldn't get their coats on fast enough. Funny how that works. The people who were so sure suddenly couldn't be in the room. Patricia sat at the head of her own table, alone in it, finally, completely, undeniably caught, and for the first time in 2 years she had absolutely nothing to say. Now, you might be waiting for the part where Patricia goes to jail, or pays some enormous price. That's not what happened. And I want to be honest about why. What she did was cruel, but it lived in that messy, in-between space that families live in. We talked to a lawyer. Briefly, could we have pursued something destruction of property, the value of the gown? Maybe. The restoration alone had cost over $1,400, and you can't put a price on the rest of it. But Eric and I made a choice. We didn't want a courtroom. We didn't want years of it. We had the truth, complete and documented, and honestly, the truth was enough. Because the consequence Patricia faced was the only one that ever actually scared her. She lost the family. Not legally. Socially, completely, Gerald never looked at her the same way again. Their marriage didn't end, but something in it did. And everyone could see it. The aunts who'd championed her went quiet and embarrassed. Maureen and Patricia barely speak now. The family that Patricia had run for 34 years on the strength of her version of events that was over. Nobody took her version of anything at face value ever again. And Eric set the boundary that mattered most. He told his mother, plainly, that she would not be alone with us, in our home, and one day around our children, until she did something she has not yet done, tell the truth. Out loud, without a single excuse, and apologize for it. She hasn't. Not really. Last I heard, she still calls it the misunderstanding. But it doesn't have the power it used to. Because everyone who matters has seen the shed. We kept a copy of everything, by the way. The footage, the slip, the statement, the text. Not to use as a weapon. Just because Vivienne taught me one more thing. Keep it somewhere safe, she said. Not to fight with. Just so that if she ever tells the story again, you never have to argue. You just have to open the folder. I framed something after all of it. Not the evidence. The blue ribbon. When my mother's dress went back to Mrs. Petrova for a final cleaning, I asked her to gently remove the little blue ribbon from the hem, and I had it framed in a tiny shadow box, and it hangs in our hallway now, where I see it every morning. Because here is the quiet thing I carried out of all of it. The thing I'd give to you if you've sat with me this long. There are people who will try to erase where you came from, who will look at the thing you love most, your history, your mother, your grief, and decide it's a sad little museum piece. Something to be improved. Something to be handled. Something to be hidden behind the folding chairs so the picture looks the way they want. And for a long time, the only weapon I thought I had against people like that was to be quiet, to keep the peace, to let it go. But I was wrong. The answer to a confident liar isn't a louder voice. I could never out-talk Patricia. Nobody could. That was her whole power. The answer is to keep what's true somewhere safe, and to wait, and to lay it down all at once when it's time. A lie only has to be believed once to do its damage. But the truth just has to be kept somewhere safe until somebody's finally ready to look at it. My mother walked me down that aisle after all, in soft old lace, with a blue ribbon in the hem, exactly the way she wanted. Patricia thought she could throw that away in a shed. She forgot that some things are stronger than the people who try to bury them. If this story reminded you of someone who tried to erase a part of you, or someone who quietly carried you when you couldn't carry yourself, share it with a person who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.